That afternoon, Stephanie and her mother took the 15-minute drive from Haggard to Gordon's estate. Her mum opened the front door and stepped back. "Owner of the house goes first?" she said with a little smile and a bow, and Stephanie stepped inside. She wasn't thinking of this house as her property. The idea was too big, too silly, even if her parents were technically the custodians until she turned 18. How could she own a house? How many other 12-year-old kids owned houses? No. It was too silly an idea, too far-fetched, too crazy, exactly the kind of thing that Gordon would have thought made perfect sense. The house was big and quiet and empty as they walked through it. Everything seemed new to her now, and Stephanie found herself reacting differently to the furniture and carpets and paintings. Did she like it? Did she agree with this color or that fabric? One thing that had to be said for Gordon: he had a good eye. Stephanie's mother said there was very little she would change if she had to. Some of the paintings were a little too unnerving for her taste, maybe, but on the whole the furnishings were elegant and understated, exuding an air of distinction that befitted a house of this stature. They hadn't decided what they were going to do with the house. Any decision was left up to Stephanie, but her parents still had the villa to consider. Owning 3 houses between them seemed a bit much. Her father had suggested selling the villa, but her mother hated the thought of letting go of a place so idyllic. They'd also talked about Stephanie's education, and she knew that conversation was far from over. The moment they had left Mr. Fedgwick's office, they warned her not to let all this go to her head. Recent events, they had said, should not mean she could stop studying, stop planning for college. She needed to be independent, they said. She needed to make it on her own. Stephanie had let them talk, and nodded occasionally and muttered an agreement where an agreement was appropriate. She didn't bother to explain that she needed college. She needed to find her own way in the world because she knew that if she didn't, she'd never escape Haggard. She wasn't about to throw her future away simply because she had come into some money. She and her mother spent so long looking around the ground floor that by the time they got to the bottom of the stairs, it was already 5 o'clock. With their exploring done for the day, they locked up and walked to the car. The first few drops of rain splattered against the windscreen as they got in. Stephanie clicked her seatbelt closed and her mother turned the key in the ignition. The car spluttered a bit, groaned a little, and then shut up altogether. Stephanie's mother looked at her. Uh-oh. They both got out and opened the bonnet. "Well," her mother said, looking at the engine, "at least that's still there." "Do you know anything about engines?" Stephanie asked. "That's why I have a husband, so I don't have to. Engines and shelves, that's why man was invented." Stephanie made a mental note to learn about engines before she turned 18. She wasn't too fussed about the shelves. Her mum dug her mobile phone out of her bag and called Stephanie's dad, but he was busy on site and there was no way he could get to them before nightfall. They went back inside the house and her mother called a mechanic, and they spent 3/4 of an hour waiting for him to arrive. The sky was grey and angry, and the rain was falling hard by the time the truck appeared around the corner. It splashed through puddles on its way up the long drive, and Stephanie's mum pulled her jacket over her head and ran out to meet it. Stephanie could see a great big dog in the cab of the truck, looking on as the mechanic got out to examine their car. After a few minutes, her mother ran back inside, thoroughly drenched. "He can't fix it here," she said, wringing out her jacket on the porch. "So he's going to tow it to the garage. It shouldn't take too long to fix." "Will there be room for both of us in the truck?" "You can sit on my knee." "Mom?" "Or I can sit on your knee, whatever works." "Can I stay here?" Her mother looked at her. "On your own? Please? You just said it won't take long, and I'd like to have another look around, just on my own." "I don't know, Steph. Please? I've stayed on my own before. I won't break anything, I swear." Her mother laughed. "Okay, fine. I shouldn't be any more than an hour, all right? An hour and a half at the most." Her mother gave her a quick kiss on the cheek. "Call me if you need anything." She ran back outside and jumped in the cab next to the dog, who proceeded to slobber all over her face. Stephanie watched their car being towed off into the distance, and then it vanished from sight. She did a little more exploring now that she was on her own. She climbed the stairs and went straight to Gordon's study. His publisher, Seamus T. Steep of Arclight Books, had phoned them earlier that day, passing on his condolences and inquiring about the state of Gordon's last book. Her mother had told him that they'd find out if Gordon had completed it, and if he had, they'd send it on. Mr. Steep was very keen to get the book on the shelves, certain that it would crash onto the bestseller list and stay there for a long time. Dead writers sell, he had said, like he approved of Gordon's clever marketing ploy. Stephanie opened the desk drawer and found the manuscript in a neat stack. She pulled it out carefully and laid it on the desktop, careful not to smudge the paper. The first page held the title, Nothing More, in bold lettering. And the darkness reigned upon them. The manuscript was thick and heavy, like all of Gordon's books. She'd read most of them, and the odd splash of pretension aside, had quite enjoyed his work. His stories tended to be about people who could do astonishing and wonderful things, and the strange and terrible events that invariably led up to their bizarre and horrible deaths. She noticed the way he would set up a strong and noble hero, and over the course of the book systematically subject this hero to brutal punishment in a bid to strip away all his arrogance and certainty, so that by the end he was humbled and had learned a great lesson. And then Gordon killed him off, usually in the most undignified way possible. Stephanie could almost hear Gordon laughing with mischievous glee as she'd read. She lifted the title page and carefully laid it face down on the desk beside the manuscript. She started reading. She didn't mean to spend long at it, but soon she was devouring every word, oblivious to the creaking old house and the rain outside. Her mobile phone rang, making her jump. She'd been reading for 2 hours. She pressed the answer button and held it to her ear. "Hi, sweetie," came her mother's voice. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Stephanie answered. "Just reading." "You're not reading one of Gordon's books, are you?" "Steph, he writes about horrible monsters and scary stuff and bad people doing worse things. It'll give you nightmares." "No, Mum, I'm reading the dictionary." Even the brief silence from the other end of the phone was skeptical. "The dictionary?" her mother said. "Really?" "Yeah," Stephanie said. "Did you know that popple is a word?" "You are stranger than your father, you know that." "I suspected as much. So is the car fixed yet?" "No, and that's why I'm calling. They can't get it going, and the road up to you is flooded. I'm going to get a taxi up as far as it'll go, and then I'll see if I can find some way around on foot. It's going to be another 2 hours at least." Stephanie sensed an opportunity. Ever since she was a child, she had much preferred her own company to the company of others, and it occurred to her that she had never spent a whole night without her parents nearby. A small taste of freedom, and it almost tingled on her tongue. "Mom, it's fine. You don't have to. I'm okay here. There's no way I'm leaving you in a strange house by yourself." "It's not a strange house. It's Gordon's, and it's fine. There's no point in you trying to get here tonight. It's lashing rain." "Sweetie, it won't take me long." "It'll take you ages. Where's it flooded?" Her mother paused. "At the bridge." "The bridge? And you want to walk from the bridge to here?" "If I speed walk..." "Mom, don't be silly. Get Dad to pick you up." "Sweetheart, are you sure?" "I like it here, really. Okay?" "Well, okay," her mother said reluctantly. "I'll be over first thing in the morning to pick you up, all right? And I saw some food in the cupboard, so if you're hungry you can make yourself something." "Okay. I'll see you tomorrow then. Call us if you need anything, or if you just want some company." "I will. Night, Mom. I love you. I know." Stephanie hung up and grinned. She slipped the phone back into her jacket and put her feet up on the desk, relaxing back into the chair, and went back to reading. When she looked up again, she was surprised to find that it was almost midnight, and the rain had stopped. If she were home right now, she'd be in bed. She blinked, her eyes sore, stood up from the desk, and went downstairs to the kitchen. For all his wealth and success and extravagant tastes, she was thankful that when it came to food, Gordon was a pretty standard guy. The bread was stale and the fruit was a bit too ripe, but there were biscuits and there was cereal, and the milk in the fridge was still good for one more day. Stephanie made herself a snack and wandered to the living room, where she flicked on the TV. She sat on the couch and was just getting comfy when the house phone rang. She looked at it, resting there on the table at her elbow. Who would be calling? Anyone who knew Gordon had died wouldn't be calling because they'd know he had died, and she didn't really want to be the one to tell anyone who didn't know. It could be her parents, but then why didn't they just call her mobile? Figuring that as the new owner of the house it was her responsibility to answer her own phone, Stephanie picked it up and held it to her ear. Hello? Silence. Hello? Stephanie repeated.
Who is this?
Came a man's voice. I'm sorry, Stephanie said. Who do you want to speak to?
Who is this?
Responded the voice, more irritably this time. If you're looking for Gordon Edgley, Stephanie said, I'm afraid that he's—
I know Edgley's dead,
snapped the man.
Who are you? Your name?
Stephanie hesitated. Why do you want to know? She asked.
What are you doing in that house? Why are you in his house?
If you want to call back tomorrow—
I don't want to, alright? Listen to me, girlie. If you mess up my master's plans, he'll be very displeased, and he's not a man you want to displease. You got that? Now tell me who you are.
Stephanie realized her hands were shaking. She forced herself to calm down and quickly found anger replacing her nervousness. My name is none of your business, she said. If you want to talk to someone, call back tomorrow at a reasonable hour.
You don't talk to me like that,
the man hissed. Good night, Stephanie said firmly.
You do not talk to me like—
But Stephanie was already putting the phone down. Suddenly the idea of spending the whole night here wasn't as appealing as it had first sounded. She considered calling her parents, then scolded herself for being so childish. No need to worry them, she thought to herself. No need to worry them about something so— Someone pounded on the front door.
Open up!
Came the man's voice between the pounding. Stephanie got to her feet, staring through the hall beyond the living room. She could see a dark shape behind the frosted glass around the front door.
Open the damn door!
Stephanie backed up to the fireplace, her heart pounding in her chest. He knew she was in there. There was no use pretending that she wasn't. But maybe, if she stayed really quiet, he'd give up and go away. She heard him cursing, and the pounding grew so heavy that the front door rattled under the blows.
Leave me alone!
Stephanie shouted.
Open the door!
No! She shouted back. She liked shouting. It disguised her fear.
I'm calling the police! I'm calling the police right now!
The pounding stopped immediately, and Stephanie saw the shape move away from the door. Was that it? Had she scared him away? She thought of the back door. Was it locked? Of course it was locked. It had to be locked. But she wasn't sure, she wasn't certain. She grabbed a poker from the fireplace and was reaching for the phone when she heard a knock on the window beside her. She cried out and jumped back. The curtains were open, and outside the window was pitch black. She couldn't see a thing.
Are you alone in there?
Came the voice. It was teasing now, playing with her.
Go away!
She said loudly, holding up the poker so he could see it. She heard the man laugh.
What are you going to do with that?
He asked.
I'll break your head open with it!
Stephanie screamed at him, fear and fury bubbling inside her. She heard him laugh again.
I just want to come in,
he said.
Open the door for me, girlie. Let me come in.
The police are on their way, she said.
You're a liar.
Still, she could see nothing beyond the glass, and he could see everything. She moved to the phone, snatching it from its cradle.
Don't do that,
came the voice. I'm calling the police.
The road's closed, girlie. You call them, I'll break down that door and kill you hours before they get here.
Fear became terror, and Stephanie froze. She was going to cry. She could feel it, the tears welling up inside her. She hadn't cried in years. What do you want? She said to the darkness. Why do you want to come in?
It's got nothing to do with me, girlie. I've just been sent to pick something up. Let me in. I'll look around, get what I came here for and leave. I won't harm a pretty little hair on your pretty little head, I promise. Now you just open that door right this second.
Stephanie gripped the poker in both hands and shook her head. She was crying now, tears rolling down her cheeks.
No,
she said. She screamed as a fist smashed through the window, showering the carpet with glass. She stumbled back as the man started climbing in, glaring at her with blazing eyes, unmindful of the glass that cut into him. The moment one foot touched the floor inside the house, Stephanie was bolting out of the room, over to the front door, fumbling at the lock. Strong hands grabbed her from behind. She screamed again as she was lifted off her feet and carried back. She kicked out, slamming a heel into his shin. The man grunted and let go, and Stephanie twisted, trying to swing the poker into his face, but he caught it and pulled it from her grasp. One hand went to her throat, and Stephanie gagged, unable to breathe as the man forced her back into the living room. He pushed her into an armchair and leaned over her, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not break his grip.
"Now then,"
the man said, his mouth contorting into a sneer.
"Why don't you just give me the key, little girlie?"
And that's when the front door was flung off its hinges, and Skullduggery Pleasant burst into the house. The man cursed and released Stephanie and swung the poker, but Skullduggery moved straight to him and hit him so hard Stephanie thought the man's head might come off. He hit the ground and tumbled backwards, but rolled to his feet as Skullduggery moved in again. The man launched himself forward. They both collided and went backwards over the couch, and Skullduggery lost his hat. Stephanie saw a flash of white above the scarf. They got to their feet, grappling, and the man swung a punch that knocked Skullduggery's sunglasses to the other side of the room. Skullduggery responded by moving in low, grabbing the man around the waist and twisting his hip into him. The man was flipped to the floor hard. He cursed a little more, then remembered Stephanie and made for her. Stephanie leapt out of the chair, but before he could reach her, Skullduggery was there, kicking the man's legs out from under him. The man hit a small coffee table with his chin and howled in pain.
"Oh, you think you can stop me?"
He screamed as he tried to stand. His knees seemed shaky.
"Do you know who I am?"
"Haven't the foggiest," Skullduggery said. The man spat blood and grinned defiantly.
"Well, I know about you,"
he said.
"My master told me all about you, detective, and you're going to have to do a lot more than that to stop me."
Skullduggery shrugged, and Stephanie watched in amazement as a ball of fire flared up in his hand, and he hurled it, and the man was suddenly covered in flame. But instead of screaming, the man tilted his head back and roared with laughter. The fire may have engulfed him, but it wasn't burning him.
"More!"
He laughed.
"Give me more!"
"If you insist." And then Skullduggery took an old-fashioned revolver from his jacket and fired, the gun bucking slightly with the recoil. The bullet hit the man in the shoulder, and he screamed, then tried to run and tripped. He scrambled for the doorway, ducking and dodging lest he get shot again, the flames obstructing his vision so much that he hit a wall on his way out. And then he was gone. Stephanie stared at the door, trying to make sense of the impossible. "Well," Skullduggery said, "that's something you don't see every day." She turned. When his hat came off, his hair had come off too. In the confusion, all she had seen was a chalk-white scalp, so she turned expecting to see a bald albino maybe. But no. With his sunglasses gone and his scarf hanging down, there was no denying the fact that he had no flesh, he had no skin, he had no eyes, and he had no face. All he had was a skull for a head. Skullduggery put his gun away and walked out to the hall. He peered out into the night. Satisfied that there were no human fireballs lurking anywhere nearby, he came back inside and picked the door off the ground, grunting with the effort. He maneuvered it back to where it belonged, leaving it leaning in the doorway. Then he shrugged and came back into the living room, where Stephanie was still standing and staring at him. "Sorry about the door," he said. Stephanie stared. "I'll pay to get it fixed." Stephanie stared. "It's still a good door, you know. Sturdy." When he realized that Stephanie was in no condition to do anything but stare, he shrugged again and took off his coat, folded it neatly, and draped it over the back of a chair. He went to the broken window and started picking up the shards of glass. Now that he didn't have his coat on, Stephanie could truly appreciate how thin he really was. His suit, well tailored though it was, hung off him, giving it a shapeless quality. She watched him collect the broken glass and saw a flash of bone between his shirt sleeve and glove. He stood, looking back at her.
Where should I put all this glass?
I don't know, Stephanie said in a quiet voice. You're a skeleton.
I am indeed, he said. Gordon used to keep a wheelie bin out at the back door. Shall I put it in that?
Stephanie nodded. Yes, okay, she said simply, and watched Skullduggery carry the armful of glass shards out of the room. All her life she had longed for something else, for something to take her out of the humdrum world she knew. And now that it looked like it might actually happen, she didn't have one clue what to do. Questions were tripping over themselves in her head, each one vying to be the one that was asked first. So many of them. Skullduggery came back in and she asked the first question. Did you find it all right?
I did, yes. It was where he always kept it.
Okay then. If questions were people, she felt that they'd all be staring at her now in disbelief. She struggled to form coherent thoughts.
Did you tell him your name?
Skullduggery was asking. What?
Your name. Did you tell him?
No.
Good. You know something's true name, you have power over it. But even a given name, even Stephanie, that would have been enough to do it.
To do what?
To give him some influence over you. To get you to do what he asked. If he had your name, and he knew what to do with it, sometimes that's all it takes. That's a scary thought now, isn't it?
What's going on? Stephanie asked. Who was he? What did he want? Just who are you?
I'm me,
Skullduggery said, picking up his hat and wig and placing them on a nearby table.
As for him, I don't know who he is, never seen him before in my life.
You shot him?
That's right.
And you threw fire at him?
Yes, I did.
Stephanie's legs felt weak and her head felt light. Mr. Pleasant, you're a skeleton.
Ah, yes, back to the crux of the matter. Yes, I am, as you say, a skeleton. I have been one for a few years now.
Am I going mad?
I hope not.
So you're real, you actually exist?
Presumably.
You mean you're not sure if you exist or not?
I'm fairly certain. I mean, I could be wrong, I could be some ghastly hallucination, a figment of my imagination.
You might be a figment of your own imagination.
Stranger things have happened, and do, with alarming regularity.
This is too weird. Skullduggery put his gloved hands in his pockets and cocked his head. He had no eyeballs, so it was hard to tell if he was looking at her or not.
You know, I met your uncle under similar circumstances. Well, kind of similar, but he was drunk. And we were in a bar. And he had vomited on my shoes, so I suppose the actual circumstances aren't overly similar, but both events include a meeting, so my point is, he was having some trouble, and I was there to lend a hand, and we became good friends after that. Good friends.
His head tilted.
You look like you might faint.
Stephanie nodded slowly. I've never fainted before, but I think you might be right.
Do you want me to catch you if you fall, or?
If you wouldn't mind.
No problem at all.
Thank you. Stephanie gave him a weak smile, and then darkness clouded her vision, and she felt herself falling, and the last thing she saw was Skullduggery Pleasant darting across the room towards her. Stephanie awoke on the couch with a blanket over her. The room was dark, lit only by 2 lamps in opposite corners. She looked over at the broken window, saw that it was now boarded up. She heard a hammering from the hall, and when she felt strong enough to stand, she slowly rose and walked out of the living room. Skullduggery Pleasant was trying to hang the door back on its hinges. He had his shirt sleeve rolled up on his left forearm. Ulna, Stephanie corrected herself, proving that her first year of biology class had not gone to waste. Or was it Radius? Or both? She heard him mutter, then he noticed her and nodded brightly.
Ah, you're up.
You fixed the window.
Well, covered it up. Gordon had a few pieces of timber out back, so I did what I could. Not having the same luck with the door, though. I find it much easier to blast them off than put them back. How are you feeling?
I'm okay, Stephanie said.
A cup of hot tea, that's what you need, lots of sugar.
He abandoned the door and guided her to the kitchen. She sat at the table while he boiled the water. "Hungry?" he asked when it had boiled. But she shook her head. "Milk?" She nodded. He added milk and spoonfuls of sugar, gave the tea a quick stir, and put the cup on the table in front of her. She took a sip. It was hot, but nice. "Thank you," Stephanie said, and he gave a little shrug. It was hard discerning some of his gestures without a face to go by, but she took the shrug to mean, think nothing of it. "Was that magic? With the fire and blasting the door?" "Yes, it was." She peered closer. "How can you talk?" "Sorry?" "How can you talk? You move your mouth when you speak, but you've got no tongue, you've got no lips, you've got no vocal cords. I mean, I know what skeletons look like. I've seen diagrams and models and stuff, and the only things that hold them together are flesh and skin and ligaments, so why don't you just fall apart?" He gave another shrug, both shoulders this time. "Well, that's magic too." She looked at him. "Magic's pretty handy." "Yes, magic is." "And what about, nerve endings? Can you feel pain?" "I can, but that's not a bad thing. Pain lets you know when you're alive, after all." "And are you alive?" "Well, technically, no, but..." She peered into his empty eye sockets. "Do you have a brain?" He laughed. "I don't have a brain, I don't have any organs, but I have a consciousness." He started clearing away the sugar in the milk. "To be honest with you, it's not even my head." "What?" "It's not. They ran away with my skull. I won this one in a poker game." "That's not even yours. How does it feel?" "It'll do. It'll do until I finally get around to getting my own head back." You look faintly disgusted. Doesn't it feel weird? It'd be like wearing someone else's socks." "You get used to it." "What happened to you?" she asked. "Were you born like this?" "No, I was born perfectly normal. Skin, organs, the whole shebang. Even had a face that wasn't too bad to look at, if I do say so myself." "So what happened?" Skullduggery leaned against the worktop, arms folded across his chest. "I got into magic. Back then, back when I was, for want of a better term, alive. There were some pretty nasty people around. The world was seeing a darkness it might never have recovered from. It was war, you see. A secret war, but war nonetheless. There was a sorcerer, malevolent, worse than any of the others, and he had himself an army. Those of us who refused to fall in behind him found ourselves standing up against him. And we were winning. Eventually, after years of fighting this little war of ours, we were actually winning. His support was crumbling, his influence was fading, and he was staring defeat in the face. So he ordered one last, desperate strike against all the leaders on our side." Stephanie stared at him, lost in his voice. "I went up against his right-hand man, who had laid out a wickedly exquisite trap. I didn't suspect a thing until it was too late. So, I died. He killed me. 23rd of October, it was, and my heart stopped beating. Once I was dead, they stuck my body up on a pike and burned it for all to see. They used me as a warning. They used the bodies of all the leaders they had killed as warnings. And to my utter horror, it worked." "What do you mean?" "The tide turned. Our side started losing ground. Malevolent got stronger. It was more than I could stand, so I came back." "You just came back?" "It's complicated. When I died, I never moved on. Something was holding me here, making me watch. I've never heard of it happening before that, and I haven't heard of it happening since, but it happened to me. So, when it got too much, I woke up, a bag of bones. Literally. They had gathered up my bones and put them in a bag and thrown the bag into a river. So, that was a marvelous new experience right there." "Then what happened?" "I put myself back together, which was rather painful, then climbed out of the river and rejoined the fight, and in the end, we won. We finally won.
So, with Malevolent defeated, I quit that whole scene and struck out on my own for the first time in a few 100 years.
Stephanie blinked. Few 100?
It was a long war.
That man, he called you detective.
He obviously knows me by reputation,
Skullduggery said, standing a little straighter.
I solve mysteries now.
Really?
Quite good at it, too.
So, what, you're tracking down your head? Skullduggery looked at her. If he'd had eyelids, he might well be blinking.
It'd be nice to have it back, sure, but...
So, you don't need it, like, so you can rest in peace?
No, not really.
Why did they take it? Was that another warning?
Oh, no,
Skullduggery said with a little laugh.
No, they didn't take it. I was sleeping, about 10 or 15 years ago, and these little goblin things ran up and nicked it right off my spinal column. Didn't notice it was gone till the next morning.
Stephanie frowned. And you didn't feel that?
Well, like I said, I was asleep. Meditating, I suppose you'd call it. I can't see, hear, or feel anything when I'm meditating. Have you tried it?
No.
It's very relaxing. I think you'd like it.
I'm sorry, I'm still stuck on you losing your head.
I didn't lose it, he said defensively. It was stolen.
Stephanie was feeling stronger now. She couldn't believe that she'd fainted. Fainted? It was such an old woman thing to do. She glanced up at Skullduggery. You've had a very unusual life, haven't you?
I suppose I have. Not over yet, though. Well, technically it is, but...
Isn't there anything you miss?
About what?
About living?
Compared to how long I've been like this, I was only technically alive for a blink of an eye. I can't really remember enough about having a beating heart in my chest to miss it.
So there's nothing you miss?
I suppose I miss hair. I miss how it was, and how it was there, on top of my head. I suppose I miss my hair.
He took out his pocket watch and his head jerked back.
Wow, look at the time. I've got to go, Stephanie.
Go where?
Things to do, I'm afraid. Number 1 is finding out why that nice gentleman was sent here, and number 2 is finding out who sent him.
You can't leave me alone, she said, following him into the living room.
Yes,
he corrected.
I can. You'll be perfectly safe.
The front door's off.
Well, yes. You'll be perfectly safe as long as they don't come through the front door.
He pulled on his coat, but she snatched his hat away.
Are you taking my hat hostage? He asked doubtfully.
You're either staying here to make sure no one else attacks me, or you're taking me with you.
Skullduggery froze. That, he said eventually, wouldn't be too safe for you.
Neither would being left here on my own.
But you can hide, he said, gesturing around the room. There's so many places to hide. I'm sure there are plenty of good solid wardrobes your size, even under a bed. You'd be surprised how many people don't check under beds these days.
Mr. Pleasant.
Skullduggery, please.
Skullduggery, you saved my life tonight. Are you going to undo all that effort by leaving me here so someone else can come along and just kill me?
That's a very defeatist attitude you've got there. I once knew a fellow, a little older than you. He wanted to join me in my adventures, wanted to solve mysteries that beggared belief. He kept asking, kept on at me about it. He finally proved himself after a long time, and we became partners.
And did you go on to have lots of exciting adventures?
I did. He didn't. He died on our very first case together. Horrible death. Messy, too. Lots of flailing around.
Well, I don't plan on dying anytime soon, and I've got something he didn't.
And that is?
Your hat. Take me with you, or I'll stand on it. Skullduggery looked at her with his big hollow eye sockets, then held out his hand for his hat.
Don't say I didn't warn you.